That's right. The Survivor Know-It-Alls are back here once again, coming to you live on the internet,
Woo!
not in person. I'm Rob Cesternino. Here is Stephen Fishbach. Steve, what a night. What a
Yeah,
night.
it was fine. It was fine.
It was fine.
No, it was incredible. What a great episode. What a crazy, awesome episode. What a perfect, one of the best episodes, not just of Survivor, but of television. And
Of
we'll get into
television.
of
Wow.
television. I think this is where, not to be hyperbolic, but one of the best, scripted things in history. No, one of the best non-scripted things. This is why Survivor is so great. You literally could not write it, or you could write this, but you'd have to be a really good writer to write something like this. It's so
Cochran-esque, yes.
Cochran-esque. It's so perfect. This whole moral struggle that Ty has been on all season long. You know, he starts off this blissful Blythe gardener, protecting the trees. He turns to the dark side,
Yes.
pours out the water. Last week, he literally did one of the most despicable actions in the history of the show, and this week redeems it all. My blog this week is all about the Star Wars parallels. Now he is the Anakin Skywalker of Survivor.
Yes. Okay. So the circle has been complete. The midi-chlorians are off the scale with Tai Trang.
Yeah.
And so much to talk about. Yeah. What an arc this season. And again, with everything we went through with Scott and Jason and the Alicia stuff, setting up this story, then to have everything paid off with Ty and Scott and going home. It was just amazing, wonderful television, without being hyperbolic, a wonderful episode of the show, and really a fun thing that we get to talk about here. And really,
it's great. We need to talk about it. It's so cool. I'm just like still giddy from the whole thing.
I got an email earlier tonight from Caroline's on Broadway. They thanked me for having the live know-it-alls last week, where just the entire place would have just gone nuts. People were just going insane.
Yeah, it would have been a riot. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, very, very exciting to talk about this. We're going to take your comments on this episode, hashtag RHAP, also on our YouTube channel at robswebsite.com/YouTube. Got a really fun show coming up tomorrow. Of course, exit interview with Scott. That should be interesting. Then we're going to have Shireen is going to be here with me in the studio for the recap tomorrow. Very excited about that.
Wow.
That'll be really exciting.
Yeah, I think she's a great one. Talk about it's all kinds of things. Always great to get her insight.
Yeah, so we will talk about that. Plus voicemails coming up. I'm sure we're gonna get a lot of calls after this episode. Scott Green, who's been on the podcast a couple times, that he has talked a lot about game shows. He actually recently was at a taping of The Price is Right, which is going to be on tomorrow morning. You may want to set your DVRs for that. He is going to be joining me for the voicemails. Very excited about that. Stephen, by the way, also tonight I am wearing one of the Know-It-Alls Live T-shirts that we had
I need to get one of those. Where do I get them? Tell me where I get them.
Go to robbinswebsite.com/KIA5 shirt, if you see it.
Was there a KIA4 shirt?
There was not a KIA4
shirt. Was there a KIA3 shirt? That's what I really want to know.
Yeah,
3?
That's Brian Malloy designed these shirts. I'm going to forget to talk about it if I don't say it right up here.
No, they're really cool. They're really cool.
All right, let's get into talking about this. I just want to start off.
You're coming in and out on static. Sorry, just to.
Okay, well, can you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, we're good now. We're good. Wait.
Okay, all right, great. All right, so Stephen, I have to talk about this from the perspective first of Ty. Did Ty make a good move tonight?
So that's a really hard question, and I think let's the position Ty was in if he stays with the guys, right? He's with those three. He's with Jason and Scott. He can beat either of them in the finals, that's for sure. But there's this other threat of Julia, who's now kind of with Jason and Scott as well. And Jason and Scott are talking about, we want to get Julia. I'm sorry, they're saying we want to get Ty out and take Julia with us. So Ty has a position with those boys. Now, just because they said that to Julia doesn't mean that's what they actually think. So we don't really know where Jason and Scott were in this. Were they more with Ty? Were they more with Julia? I mean, they've shown pretty consistent loyalty to the people they've been loyal to. And they're such big goats. So I think he was in a pretty solid position over there. Now, after this vote, he's got an advantage and an idol. He's just pissed off his former allies, and he's kind of expendable to the other people. I think Ty's in a really bad place right now, and I think he was in a great place a minute ago, and now he's not in a great place.
Yeah, I think Ty made a bad move tonight. I love this move for Aubrey, for Sydney. I love it so much for them, and we'll talk about that. But I think Ty made a bad move. I think Ty made great TV, and maybe Ty, if it was any question, really endeared himself as a fan favorite and maybe locked up an appearance on a future season, but I don't think that was really in question before this episode, and he really redeemed himself after last week's episode. So from a TV point of view, Ty solidified himself. He's the favorite player of the season, I think, for most people.
Definitely the favorite player of the season. People everywhere I go, people are saying, the famous Jeff Probst people on the street love Ty.
I think it was a really bad move for Ty because, one, he had one half of the super idol, which now take the super idol off the table unless another idol gets hidden, and you don't know where it's ultimately going to go.
But either way, the super idol was going off the table tonight.
Yeah, I guess it was gonna be used, but that's a fair point. So yeah, you're changing my mind a little bit. So Ty actually keeps his half of the idol.
If Ty had voted for Aubrey, it would have been a split, half Aubrey, half Scott.
Yeah. All right. So yeah. So ultimately, if he would have either had to play his idol for himself. Had the plan not gone on board. So I guess if he in the best case scenario, he tells Aubrey and Sydney he's with them, and then has them vote for Scott, which then doesn't make there be enough votes for him to go out in this.
But if he flipped his vote to Aubrey, right, then it's 3 for Aubrey, 3 for Scott, and so that's either a revote with no possibility of a super idol, or Scott plays a super idol and Aubrey goes home. But either way, I think the idol is, hypothetically speaking, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but let's say there was a revote. Let's say Scott didn't play his super idol after the vote. So there's a revote. Scott can't play a super idol after that point. Who's voting for Scott? Who's voting for Aubrey? So we think that Scott, Jason, Ty, I guess Scott can't vote. So Jason, Ty, and maybe Julia vote for Aubrey, and then Sydney, Michelle, and Joe, and then it's another vote.
You're right. So an idol is going to end up going out of the game here at some point. So what Ty then does here, so I like this a little bit more now that we're really talking it through. And again, this is probably one of the consequences of doing this show right after the episode, but we're so excited. But so Ty gets to hold on to his idol, but the possibility the super idol goes away. But I do think that he was probably set up better. I just feel like that you're right. He is expendable now at this point, even more so to this alliance of Aubrey and Sydney and Joe. What do they need Ty for? Because he's a person, maybe does he become a little bit more desirable to take to the end now that he has some blood on his hands?
No, he's less. I mean, I think I'd seen a lot of analysis that was saying, Ty's problem was always going to be that he would be perceived as like Jason and Scott's servant, and by not getting out from under their shadow, and this makes him more threatening. He's got this huge resume piece now. So I think we've talked a lot about how threat level is a real dangerous in Survivor. Yeah. Ty's threat level's off the roof now. He's the favorite at the end. He's got this idol and he's got the advantage. He's spiking all over the place. If he doesn't do something if he doesn't burn it all next week, play everything, Ty. Play everything next week or you're done.
I gotta say, the thing that made the least sense to me in this episode tonight is where Julia and Michelle are. Now, Julia got a lot of face time tonight, and Julia, Jason described her as our double agent. She's the person playing both sides. She's really with them. I'm not sure exactly why she goes to the guys and says, "Hey, we're putting 5 votes on Ty tonight because we want to flush the idol," and the guys seem like they're on board with this plan. Yeah. And to me, I don't understand. If Julia is working with the guys, doesn't it make more sense to keep those idols in play and keep the super idol in play? If Julia is working with the guys, why not vote together as a group of at least 4 and potentially 5 with Michelle?
I don't think they knew about the Scott plan. It seemed didn't Ty at some point didn't wasn't Aubrey saying to Ty, like, oh, they're out to get you, we're going to do something else? Like, I think that was part of that whole conversation between Aubrey and Ty, where they were sort of outing Julia as this double agent. And I think that's what. So I don't, neither Michelle nor Julia. That's not a cohesive unit. They weren't with Aubrey and Joe and Sydney.
Yeah, but who are Julia and Michelle with? Are they with the
Nobody.
guys or?
Well, Michelle's not with anybody, right? As far as we can tell, she's with Julia maybe. Julia, I think, is playing that role of double agent, and I think the guys are cool with it, and she thinks maybe the girls don't know, even though the girls clearly know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the guys are cool with like getting the information. I think that and we saw a lot of people saying this on Twitter tonight, that the guys were so excited about playing the Super Idol that it almost kind of like overwhelmed their actual strategic thinking about the idols. It was like maybe there was a way to focus it where they just had to play one idol, but they were so into the idea of the Super Idol. And also, like, that's a really risky move, to risk playing one idol on one person when you're not sure who that person is. Last week they didn't even have to play the Super. Last week they thought that for sure they were going to have to play the Super Idol. They didn't have to. So I think from their perspective, like, maybe there's a chance the girls cannibalize themselves again. Like, let's hold on to these. There's no reason to rush this. They might take one of their own out. Once we have all the information and all the votes are cast, then we can make a choice. And we trust Ty 100%. Now, as someone who has lost a game based on trusting someone 100%, I have a lot of sympathy for that.
So just to drive home this point, just in case people turned off the episode before they got to hear Scott's final words, he says, I am sitting here with Jason's idol in my hands. Jason should have this. Stephen, why did Jason give the idol to Scott before Tribal Council? Why couldn't Jason have held on to the idol and then either played it for Scott if necessary or played it on Scott if necessary? It doesn't change anything that Ty still did not use his half of the idol to save Scott, but Jason would still have access to his idol.
Yeah, no, I mean, clearly, obviously in a perfect world, and Scott could have given it back to him. And, I wonder if Scott was even aware of that. I think sometimes...
Could he get, after the votes were read, he could have given it back to him?
Why not? Toss it over to Jason.
I don't think that's allowed. I don't think that you're allowed to, okay, I got voted out of the idol. Here, have my idol. I'm not going to need it anymore. I think if it is on your person when your name comes up, I think that idol is null and void.
Well, we need to ask Jeff this, because I've never heard that rule. And I think that people will often get very rigid about their perception of what's allowed and what's not allowed. Remember, like, last season, and again, like, not to bring everything back to me, but really everything revolves around me. Remember last season when Jeremy found out that they were voting for me and I was in the voting booth, and I was like, why didn't you yell, hey, Fishbach, they're voting for you? Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, are you allowed to do that? Like, you're allowed to do a lot. You just aren't aware of it.
I can't imagine that you're allowed to, if you get blindsided with idols, that you can just give them to whoever you want as parting favors that, hey, I'm voted out, but here, you guys can use this.
We need to ask Dalton to get a rules clarification.
If you got voted out the night before you played your advantage, could you have given your advantage to Jeremy before you left?
Could I have tossed it over to him? I don't know, maybe.
Well, I can't use this anymore. Here you go.
Why not?
Because that's not fair.
Why? It's such a public thing. It's like we all want. Why is it not fair? Why is it like that any less fair than anything? All right, whatever. Like, maybe you're right. I'll cede the point that you're probably right about this. But yeah, you're probably right. But I think getting back to the question of like, why did Jason do this? I think Jason is really big on making public displays of trust, and that's actually part of why he's the strength of his gameplay. I think people are really down on everything Jason does because he's like a villain, but he actually is really good at building, trust within his group, and he does that through proofs of trust.
Let me say this, Stephen. I'm going to say, let me posit something, and I'm not getting on Jason and Scott for any of the moral issues. I'll leave that to other people, but can I say, I think that Jason and Scott have played a pretty bad game after the merge. Can I just say that this is the third consecutive week that they have been blindsided at Tribal Council. This is the third time that they've gone to a Tribal Council, and the name they've written down, the person that they thought was going home, has not gone home in any vote since the merge. And there have only been 3 people who voted for the correct person at every Tribal Council after the merge. And, Stephen, I think that is the biggest indicator of who is controlling the game about the person that, in Tocantins, how many times did the person that you voted for not go home?
Never happened.
It never happened. This is 3 times in a row. One time I can excuse. This is 3 consecutive votes that they did not know who was going home at Tribal Council.
Yeah, no, you're right. But like I agree with you, but like they did terrible Ty management, right? We saw that scene with Scott and Jason and Ty by the water where like Ty approaches them and says, "What if we align with Aubrey?" And immediately Scott says, like with no hesitation, "Actually, let's vote her out." Like no discussion, no like, "Oh, like let's hear us Ty out about that. What are your thoughts?" But they were in a really, really, really strong position, apart from that. So yes, they were blindsided. Yes, they were wrong, but they were in a really good spot. And maybe the strength of their spot made them arrogant and made them lose perspective. But like they're both kind of rational players. I mean, maybe a little irrational last week, but like you would never expect Ty to make such a self-harming decision as he made this week.
I don't know. I feel like I would expect this more than I would expect him to be putting out the fires last week. I feel like that seems more out of character for Ty than to do something like this. Stephen, does this give us any clarity on the move last week? Because you commented a number of times, both on the show and on Facebook, that I don't know if this was a good move or not. There's never been a more controversial move in terms of was this good, was this bad. Does this give us any more clarity as to what Aubrey and Sydney did last week in terms of voting out Debbie? Because I think that this episode tonight, this was a point in their favor for what they did last week. Because to me, I think it made it seem like last week, I think a lot of people felt like this was the line in the sand. This was the point of no return. They missed the shot. They didn't, again, to go back to Star Wars, this was, you had to shoot the torpedo in the Death Star at this exact moment, and if you did not do it, you lose the game. Good day, sir. And they did not take the shot at that point in time, and a lot of people felt like, okay, this is game over for Aubrey and Sydney, and that the super idol was too powerful. There was no way to disarm it at that point in time. They decided to go off the board and vote for Debbie, and now, look, Scott went home this week, and Ty is an ally of theirs.
But just because things wound up well for them doesn't mean that last week it wasn't a bad choice. You can make a bad choice, get in a hole, and dig yourself out of that hole, which is what Aubrey did. And, like, the way Aubrey worked Ty this episode, like, we still have to talk about, and I think it was one of the best and most effective ever, attempts to get someone to flip. But that still doesn't mean that they were. I mean, the one thing I did want to say to mitigate my criticism last week was that thinking about it further, Aubrey didn't know what the super idol did. So, like, based on her own lack of knowledge last week, it wasn't such a terrible decision that she made because there was just thinking that an idol was going to get flushed, thinking that would probably eliminate her or Sydney, and therefore going after Debbie. Like, it's a pretty clever move if you don't know what the super idol does.
Yeah. So all right, let's not get too caught up in this because I just think it gives a little bit of insight into what we're talking about last week, and anything can happen any given week. All right, let's talk. You're right. Let's talk. It's time to talk about Aubrey and how great she's been. And Stephen, I have to say I've been so impressed with Aubrey. I talked about how last week I was starting to get on the Aubrey train.
Yeah. What do you? Yeah.
It keeps chugging along because Aubrey, I think, is the person that's playing the best game this season.
I completely agree. I definitely think she's playing the best game this season, and certainly that we're. I mean, you could argue Sydney as well is playing a really strong game this season.
I would say I have to give it to Aubrey over Sydney. While they voted the same way after the merge, I feel like that. I felt like Sydney was in a pretty good spot. I still don't love that move that Sydney made 2 weeks ago because I felt like that Sydney was the one who was set up to be in that spot that Julia wanted to be in. The person sitting at the end with Scott and with Jason. And I think that Sydney really put her game into jeopardy with the move that she made, where Aubrey, I think, has been the beneficiary of all this. But Aubrey, I think, she was the bridesmaid in both of the challenges tonight in that she came up short. So close, though, going to the brink. But I think that so many things she did well here tonight, starting with the Ty, getting him on board with this plan, and really doing something which may seriously jeopardize his position in the game.
Yeah, no. I mean, I completely agree. I think that was like an epic. And I want to like talk about, some of the things, some of their conversations that are like even specifically. I mean, first she has that long conversation with him where she's talking about it's an emotional game and we're emotional people, and sometimes you think with your heart and sometimes you think with your head, and what a great way of just connecting with him. But the comment that I loved, and I think this is just epic, and I want to read it, the whole thing. It's not that long. She goes to Atai, and she says, I want you to be comfortable. This is your game. You're making a big move, and I'm telling you, you have 3 people behind you. I'm positive. And this like one comment is doing so much work. She's first of all, she's expressing sympathy with him. She's putting it into his perspective. She's saying it's all about his decision. She's expressing sympathy. And she's saying, we're behind you, 100%. She's not, as like Scott is saying to her, here's what we need to do. She's saying, you have these votes behind you, and then she says, I'm positive. And like in Survivor, no one is positive about anything. But if you can say, I'm positive about something, it creates so much weight, so much force. And even this, just in little ways, she says, you're making a big move. And I think that idea of like reinforcing this is a big move, we're in modern Survivor. Everyone knows it's a game of big moves. By reinforcing the idea of like you'd be making a big move. It's like she's not doing it in a pressure-y way. She's doing it in a sympathetic way, but she's also kind of reminding him, this is your big move.
Let me talk about what she did at Tribal Council, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. When they talked about her in the challenge, and she was saying, Jeff, when else in your life are you going to be standing there with a professional athlete on one side of you and somebody who is a veteran? I forget exactly how she described it, but she was sucking the kneecaps of Scott and Jason, her adversaries who were voting her out. They totally had her respect. Scott goes out to the jury. He's not going to be mad at Aubrey on that jury. He's mad at Ty.
Great call.
And so if those guys are on the jury and she's up there in the finals, that they would certainly vote for Aubrey in that spot, especially over Sydney. They hate Sydney. They don't like Ty anymore. So I think that she is somebody who is not only just making big moves in the game, she's also winning over the respect of the jury. She already has the Neil vote. So she is, I think, the biggest jury threat as well at this point. And now, are people going to realize that and vote her out? That is certainly a possibility, but I think that she has played the most impressive game to me through 10 episodes.
And that remark reemphasizes how Scott and Jason are such huge physical threats, right? Which you don't want with you at the end. You want to be able to win at the end. And I actually think that might be a part of Ty's mistake, which is that I think when you look at Ty's competitors in this game, he has gone up, the people who he's had tight competitions with have been Aubrey and they've been Sydney. And so now he's putting himself in a place where he's going to be up against the Aubreys and the Sydneys instead of the Jasons and the Scotts. You want to be against people not just who are worse than you in challenges, but who are worse than you at the things you're good at. You want to remove the people who are competitive with you at your skill sets to reinforce your ability to win those challenges. And he's doing the opposite.
He was aligned with 2 of the most beatable final Tribal Council opponents in the game. He left them to go join up with 2 of the most difficult people to beat in the final Tribal Council.
And, and like I'm saying, like he was beating Scott consistently up at challenges, and until today he was beating Jason at challenges. So it was, a bad move.
Another thing about Ty tonight, Ty is the holder of the Season 32 advantage, Stephen. Something that you know a lot about.
So the advantage has been a curse for all who have held it, which is me and Dan Foley. In fact, for both of us, the episode we played, or the Tribal Council we played it, was the Tribal Council that we went home. Now, it's slightly different for Dan because his play of it triggered his elimination from the game. I was going anyway. I just failed to save myself. But I was actually thinking about this advantage, Rob, and you may not want to engage in this kind of speculation, but I was wondering, my season filmed after this season and after Worlds Apart, obviously, so production has seen the advantage get played twice. They've seen the extra vote get played twice, and they chose to modify it for me in making it a vote steal. Do you think that means that it didn't work out well for Ty, so they tried to like fix it, or do you think it did work out well for Ty, but they still wanted to give it an even greater superpower?
Yeah, that's very interesting to me. I think that I don't want to speculate too much on it. I think we have to, we'll see soon enough within the next 3 or 4 weeks how it ultimately plays
I can't
out
wait.
for Ty.
I can't wait that long. I want to speculate.
Well, we can speculate, but I think it's a little bit of a fool's errand right now. But it is interesting that it was more powerful in the season prior to this than it is in the season that comes after it. So if you're just a regular viewer of the show and you're not really privy to the filming order and all this stuff, it is kind of weird that, okay, this thing had this power 1 season ago, but it's actually less powerful when it comes up in this season.
Right. That would be, but it would be strange to fix something that was not broken. You wouldn't like give it extra power if it was already I don't know. Maybe you would because you're right. It's out of order. Just a quick note. Dalton confirmed that you are correct and that he could not give his idol back.
Okay. Thank you. Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't think that there was much debate about that, but yeah, it would seem like the game would be so silly, I think, where if you go out of the game, you get blindsided with something on you, and it's not like a hat or something, like something that, it would make no sense to blindside people with idols because then they could just flip them to their friends.
Right. Fair. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. Rob, okay. I wasn't thinking. I'm so...
No problem. The knowing is know-it-all was not on the line. No need to sweat it out. All right, so for Ty now, with the advantage, now this is interesting to me, Stephen. Now let's bear in mind, for us at home, we've seen Dan Foley with the advantage. We've seen Stephen Fishbach with the advantage, but at the time that season 32 was filmed, yes, Dan Foley had not even gotten the advantage. I looked this up earlier tonight, that the episode with the advantage aired about a month after the episodes were filming. It might have actually aired while they were filming. So they don't know exactly where, for the modern day players, the people that are playing in seasons yet to come, say, okay, somebody has an advantage, they're a target, but that idea might not be out there. Do you think that for Ty, having the advantage makes him an even bigger target?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that he has this mystery advantage, no one knows what it is, and I think, yeah, I think they're going to think Andy's an idol. But, like, at least with me, on my season, everyone assumed that my advantage was an extra vote, right? Because they had seen Dan Foley. But I think that there's an even greater danger now for Ty. Although...
Great point. Nobody knows it's an extra vote. We all assume that it's an extra vote, but no, they don't know what his advantage is. They could think it's the Tyler Perry idol still.
They might, which actually might make him... give him some safety, because that no one wants to vote for the guy who has the super idol, right? So maybe it works to Ty's advantage that no one knows about the extra vote.
Is there a scenario this upcoming episode where even Jason, who is on the outs, could be part of a potential vote split to flush Ty's idol? Does it benefit anybody that Ty has the immunity idol?
Yeah, I think actually Jason, coming out of this episode, is in a decent position. Again, like perceived strength. Jason doesn't have an idol anymore. He lost his ally. His other ally turned on him. Jason looks like he's one of the weakest people out there right now. Plus, he has no jury credibility. Like, suddenly Jason goes from being a huge target to being someone who you wouldn't even bother to vote out. I think Jason could be a big winner from this whole thing.
Well, do people start to look at him as he is a person with no power who's really exiled into, an island of himself? Is he starting to say, boy, he's an attractive jury goat? He's not somebody who's calling the shots, but he's somebody who can, at Final 7, are we close enough to drag this guy to the end so that he can go to the end and lose to fulfill the prophecy from Stephen Fishbach from earlier this season?
I did. I said that really early. Yeah, I think so. If you were in this state, if you were in the game right now, if you were Aubrey, what would you be thinking? You'd be thinking, I want Ty out, and I want Jason sitting next to me.
Yeah, I think that Ty is in a very precarious position here moving forward. All right, so for Jason, then who does he sell that to?
So he's got Julia. Julia could bring in Michelle.
Mm-hmm. Right? That's only 3, though.
3 out of 7.
3 out of 7.
You just need 1. I mean, I guess
it seems to me that the people that are on the outs, the people who did not vote together, are Julia, Michelle, and Jason. It seems to me like that's a natural 3, whereas the people who voted together, don't forget about Joe. I mean, it's easy to. He is also a person who is correctly voted. No, sorry, he didn't vote. He voted for Debbie last week, but he correctly voted tonight with Sydney and Aubrey and Ty. He was the 4th vote for Scott. So you have to think that that group of 4 is still together. So that sets up a pretty clean 4 versus 3 scenario going into next week.
I think they want to stay with Ty, which would be probably not a great move. I mean, I think that Julia may be a likely vote out next week. If I were Aubrey, that's probably like the move out. If I didn't go for Ty, maybe you'd want to split votes on Ty and Julia, just because Julia, she has been the one bouncing between alliances. She's the one who's in everybody's ear.
Well, how do you do that? How do you split votes when it's 4 versus 3?
Well, I'm saying if they could get Jason in, I mean, who knows? I'm just saying, who knows? Like, otherwise, though, I think Julia is a likely boot, right? I don't think anyone wants to take out Jason now. It wouldn't make sense. And there's no reason to take out Michelle or Joe. Sydney and Aubrey are tight. So unless it's Ty, I think it's got to be Julia.
Yeah, this is very interesting. This is really, really fun to see how this is going to go. I think that you'd probably say boy, I guess it's either Jason or Julia. That Aubrey said tonight, boy, I think that Julia is playing a good game, but I think she's sneaky. She's not the kind of person I want to sit next to at the end. So I think that Julia is still very much on Aubrey's radar.
I think, and she's still, she's still got all of these different. She's still kind of playing that middle ground, whereas which is more dangerous than where Jason is. If I were Aubrey, I would go for Julia next, if not Ty. Probably actually Julia first.
Anything else you want to point out before we jump into some of these questions?
Yeah, well, so it's actually the same thing that is our first question, so I'll just do the question. Haiku Fishbach wants to know, do you like how they did the reward challenge tonight?
Yes.
Also, are you surprised with anyone's choices on the rewards? Give us your analysis, Rob. What do you think here?
This was really fun, I thought. First off, great to have an individual reward challenge here at the final 8. So they allowed a little bit different of, you could either play for the advantage, play for food, or play for love from home. And we had a pretty interesting split. The people that went for the advantage were Ty, Aubrey, and Sydney. People who went for food were Jason, Scott, and Michelle. And the people who went for love were only Joe and Julia. Stephen, what does it say for people who went for the advantage but didn't end up getting it? What is that in some ways? Lucky them. Yeah. So, for instance, back in season 31, you and Spencer both went for the advantage. He didn't get it. We saw Mike Holloway back in season 30. He went hard for the advantage and then didn't get it. So what does that signal to people where you go for the advantage but you don't come away with it?
I don't think there's that stigma to being aggressive strategically anymore. I think now there's just an expectation. Everyone is playing the game. Everyone is playing hard. I don't think there's going to be a sense of Julia, you went for it, you lost, you must something. Or I'm sorry, not Julia, Sydney, right? When you're playing a more aggressive game than I thought. I don't think there's that exists anymore. Now, I think maybe for someone, last season with me, Spencer felt particularly upset to not have it, and maybe going for it and coming up short makes you more fixated on it than it does, not going for it at all. So I don't think there's any target that you gain from losing out on it, but it might increase that person's awareness of it, in the game.
What does it signal somebody who's going for food when the advantage is on the table? Is that sort of just like the safe move, or does it
that's the move?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what you should do. Go for the food.
Yeah. Then also the letters from home, that Julia ends up going for the letters from home. Now, she seems like the kind of person to me that would be going for the advantage.
Yeah.
Was there any did you feel like that there was any sort of thought like, oh, well, nobody's going to be going for the letters, let me go for the letters? Or did she say, oh, I see Joe's going for the letters, let me go for that too?
Yeah, that was such a fun, and I wonder, they must have had to declare simultaneously, right? They couldn't, there's no way that they could, they were the draft or anything. I think they probably, yeah, I just love that, the strategy of the choice, oh, I know that probably not a lot of people are going to go for the letters. I miss my family a lot. I'd love to. I think that can. What do you think about that, though? What would you do in this situation, Rob? What are you going for here?
I think
knowing everything you know now.
As the gamer, I think I would probably go for the advantage here. I think you want to at least control it. I think that what we've said, the conventional wisdom coming out of your season is you want to have the advantage and you want to play it as fast as you can. You want to control it, you want to get rid of it.
Yep.
Disarm
I agree
it.
with that.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's right. And yeah, and I've always found that like thoughts of home are debilitating for me at least. I know some people find strength from them, but they really take me out of the game.
Right. You don't want to get too much. Some people do get the strength from it, but I find it the same thing about talking about food. I don't want to talk about food when I'm on Survivor because it's, I don't want to focus on what I don't have. I want to think about the game at hand and be present in what I'm doing.
Yeah, I actually like to talk about food. It is a really divisive issue when you're out there, though, because some people really like it and some people hate it. I like it. I just like it allows me to like imagine the taste of whatever it is in my mouth.
I don't want to hear about what you're going to get at the airport. I don't want to hear about like all the different, we're going to go to Cinnabon. We're going to go.
You don't have to listen. Walk away. We can have a conversation about Cinnabon. You can be over there.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about from Connor Berry. Did Ty make a mistake? I think we're both going on the record that Ty did make a mistake.
Not a great move for Ty.
Not a great move for Ty. Great night for Ty, but not necessarily. For Ty,
not a great move. Yes, and it's like, I have this line in my blog, but like, I don't know what the exact line is, but did anybody, it wasn't a great move for Darth Vader to, betray the Emperor, but we were still cheering for him when he did it.
Yeah, he ends up, spoiler alert, but he doesn't come away too great from that.
Yeah.
Well, redemption song for 420 for Ty.
Yeah.
Deadwind, going forward, how should Ty use his extra vote? Okay, are you seeing any way in which Ty could use the extra vote?
I mean, the challenge, and this is really the challenge of the extra vote, is that it's so situational that Ty would have to be in a minority alliance that's a minority by one vote, or he would have to be in a Ty alliance.
Yeah, he's in the Ty alliance. Any alliance that he's in will inherently be the Ty alliance.
Be a Ty, and it's too frustrating. No, but there needs to be an equal number of votes on both sides, and he has to. And like, how often is that the case? Where it's like the perfect situation, and it's the perfect situation. I don't think it's going to be that helpful to him. Maybe at the final 6, if Julia's voted out next week and he flips over to Jason and Michelle, I mean, maybe like it's just such a long shot that it actually plays off for him.
But now I think that this is pretty interesting that Ty ends up getting this at the final 8. I believe that Dan Foley got his where I feel like it was like the final 10 or so. Do you remember how many people were left? Was it final 11, final 12 when you got your advantage?
For me, it was the night Wigglesworth went, so it was final 11. Yeah.
Okay. So I think that for Ty, this kind of helps him because there's not going to be 6 different tribal councils that he could use it at. There's a total of 4. He didn't use it at once. So now there's only 3 tribal councils left where he could use it. Final 7, final 6, final 5. So that sort of narrows it down for him. So I think in some ways that helps him with this advantage.
That's probably true. Like there's fewer things, like there's less time for it to sort of build up as a threat in people's minds. He only has to live through 3, and then he can just be like, oh, this is what it is. Did nothing for me, which is also a real possibility for this. Maybe that's why they made it more powerful for my season, was that like not that it went wrong, but that it just did nothing.
And it didn't necessarily help, but that somebody in the majority had it, and maybe. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, let's take a question from Chris, who wants a 2-part question. Do you think another idol will be circulated into the game? And if so, do you think that suspicions of the super idol will be confirmed for everyone else due to Scott's reaction when he left? Now, Stephen, you had said that you had wanted any of the people doing exit press to find out what was the sort of general buzz about the super idol.
Yeah, sadly, go ahead.
I did ask Debbie that question when I finally got to speak to her on Tuesday, that she claimed that everybody sort of knew about what was going on, but we see that Jason says in the episode that, well, nobody knows about what the super idol can do, and we just really don't know exactly what's going on.
The way they were talking about flushing Ty's idol, and especially the way Julia was saying to Ty, player idol, really made me think that they don't know what the super idol is. And I don't know how reliable Debbie's exit interviews were.
That's a fair point. Now, does Ty explain to Aubrey and Sydney and Joe exactly what the powers are of the super idol?
I think maybe now that there's no super idol in play, and the question is like, is another idol going to come into the game?
Absolutely. You don't have a season where 2 idols combined together can make a super idol, and then only have 1 idol in play.
Yeah.
unless production was just so scared off about, boy, this thing got a little too powerful, because it's not in season 31 where they took that off the table. So maybe they kind of got scared by, boy, this Alliance of 3 has it.
There's not a chance to shut down the game. Like, we're
playing with fire here. Let's take it off the table.
Because it really would have shut down the game, and I think, you know, a lot of people were complaining about that aspect of the Super Idol. I think it's a fair one. A, that it kind of would have ended strategy, and then B, that no one really knew what his powers were.
Okay, so we'll see what happens.
All right, Frickifer wants to know, does Scott officially take the title of greatest former athlete to play Survivor? What do you think? The other contender is Jeff Kent.
No love for Gary Hogaboom?
Or Uncle Cliffy.
He made it further than Uncle Cliffy.
On 420, we have to give some love to Uncle Cliffy.
Yes, absolutely. Give some love to Uncle Cliffy tonight. Overall, what did you think of Scott?
I love Scott, and I think Scott was hurt by having Jason in the game. I think with Jason, I think Jason brought out some of Scott's worst impulses, and I think probably the reverse was true. Yeah, I think probably Scott brought out some of Jason's worst impulses. I think, you know, we saw individually after the swap when he was just when he was just operating on I guess Brains Beach, that was whatever beach it was.
Yeah.
You know, he was in the mix with everybody. He recruited Ty over to his side. He brought in Julia. Like, he was such a uniter. He was such a smart strategist. And I think, you know, everyone had this like outpouring of love for Scott. And then he rejoins with Jason, and everyone's like, "Oh, Scott, that jerk." I think
that was the best Scott of the season. Those 2 episodes where he was separated from Jason. I think that he won a fishy in that time.
Yeah, and I think that and people complained that he didn't win the fishy the previous time. You know, he was really really guiding the strategy of on that tribe and doing it really well. And I think for both of them, I think for both Jason and Scott, you know, they ended up kind of reinforcing that kind of bro-ishness of each other, which Natalie Anderson loves. So, you know, it's to each her own.
He played hard. That's all we ask for these players. Maybe too hard. He played
smart. He played for the, you know, many smart things he did. You know, I think he played a real. And is he the furthest? Did he go further than Kent?
I do think that he made it further. I don't think that Jeff Kent made it to Final 8.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff Kent was great. I love Jeff Kent.
Yeah, Jeff Kent wouldn't piss on you if you were on fire, Fishbach. Don't ever forget it.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's take this next question from Scott Grimes. Does Survivor Medical always do weird measurements pregame? Seems like having your wingspan measured would tip you off. I mean, would you train for that? I mean, what do they do? Do they come by the camp and measure you, or are they sort of like relying on you, like, so what's your wingspan?
No, I think they measure you, right, for something like that.
So when you go to the Survivor Combine?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, but you know, it's funny, Tyson always says, like, oh, you should, like, under-report things. But they measure you for the challenges that matter, or, like, over-report. You know, say you're shorter than you are so that if there's a height challenge. But they're not going to just take, you know, they're going to, like, bring out a freaking tape measure and like, base it accordingly, you know? And, like, plus, they, you know, it's not like that, you know, they're going to have the ability to, like, make adjustments.
Yeah, I'm sure they did a measurement. Okay. What about Theg61337?
Theg wants to know, maybe the G wants to know, Rob, would you have the guts to straight up tell your Alliance member you're sending them home?
Boy, would I have the guts to tell my Alliance member I'm sending them home? You mean like what Ty did at Tribal Council?
I don't know what the comparison is.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, really fun, because we talked about this scenario where both people on the Super Idol had to turn their key to make this happen, where, you know, Scott was turning his key, and Ty was like, no, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And I'm really surprised that Scott didn't just go nuts at Tribal Council. Like, what do you mean?
He was so cool about it. He's like, okay, good move.
Okay. Like, come on.
Yeah, he didn't put the screws to him at all. He's, you know.
Yeah.
Did you see this coming? Did you see, based on how confident Scott and Jason were, did you see this coming?
I knew it was going to have to, you know, it was going to come down to this sort of decision, just sort of like scratching out of my notes, like, okay, wait, so they got 4, they got 2, okay, this is going to be really fun to see if this is going to happen, and, you know, it was all coming down to, I was giddy with excitement during Tribal Council.
Yeah, I thought there was a chance that it was Aubrey. Because I thought Aubrey was going soon because of her, like, crazy visibility, but I was wrong.
No, really fun stuff. Really, really great episode.
Now okay. I think she's going all the way. I think 4, 3, 2, just narrowly losing to Michelle. No,
narrowly. But there's no way, Stephen, that you can't imagine a scenario where she loses in a final tribal council, do you?
No, I don't think she makes final tribal council.
I certainly could see the possibility. She's still my pick. You could see the scenario where she ends up just outside the money, and boy, that's frustrating.
I think that's frustrating. I think she's on the bubble. I think she's the Wentworth, the Cesternino.
Yeah, right outside that. You certainly could see that scenario. I can't see a scenario where she loses in a final tribal council.
Yeah. Knowing if you just made it one more vote, you'd have won it all. All those votes, all that money pouring down on your head.
Yeah, have fun living with that. All right, Rob's Taboo Buzzer wants to know, so is Jason the perfect GOAT to drag to the end? Is he the best GOAT on the board?
Yeah.
I would think so. I think so.
Who would vote?
I mean, maybe Joe, could you say, or is he so beloved?
Nick might vote for Jason. Scott might vote for Jason. That's 2 votes right there. Of the 4 votes, that's 2.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think that just in a vacuum, what's worse, the person who did things wrong or the person who did nothing? I think that probably the person who did things wrong, that pissed people off, is worse than the person who did nothing.
Having been on a jury, I would now agree with you. I think there's a lot of animosity, and you find reasons to like the people you want to vote for.
And I think Joe's got a nice story where, he's, a person who's
former favorite. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Had a great life. He doesn't seem like he's been a jerk to too many people.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's go. A couple more questions. Kyle Dorr, would Julie have been in a better position if she told Ty about how Jason and Scott would have cut Ty at the Final Four over her? I don't know why she would tell him that.
That would just be alienating Jason and Scott at the in favor of Ty. I don't think there's anything to be gained from that.
Yeah, I still just don't get why Julia was telling them about how she wants to flush Ty's idol. Like I don't know why they wouldn't just take her aside and say, "Hey, how about don't do that?" Yeah, like, we'll vote Ty out later down the road. Let's keep our idols in play.
But they don't care, right? Because everyone knows what the super idol is. As far as they're concerned, she can say. I was surprised that Ty was even pretending to listen to that.
Yeah.
I guess you can't just ignore someone.
Guess so. All right, one last question, Stephen.
Yeah. Last question coming here from Jorge Alvarado. How cool is it that good old-fashioned persuasion from Aubrey is what took down this seemingly unstoppable super idol? Great question, Jorge.
We talked so much about the numbers, and there was a great conversation tonight about brains versus heart in this game. Should it be brains versus beauty versus heart?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think to Jorge's point, it's like all episode long, we see Aubrey, she's trying to prove herself. I just want to prove myself that I deserve to be here. She tries to do it in one challenge. She just falls short. She tries to do it in the next challenge, and she just falls short. But she learns to use the strategic force. She does this the Jedi mind trick on Ty, and he comes around.
I didn't know you were such a big Star Wars guy. I feel like that in how many years of doing this show, I feel like you've made 0 Star Wars metaphors, and now you're all Star Wars.
I've been saving them. It's like the big payoff with Ty. It's the big payoff with my Star Wars fandom.
It's April 20th, not May the 4th, Stephen.
This episode, it brings it all out. How much is Caleb like Padme? Bear with me. He was Ty's first love, who died giving birth to the twins of Salt and Pepper. And he turned Tide of the dark side.
2 weeks from tonight, the All Star Wars May the 4th edition of Survivor Know-It-Alls. Watch out for that after episode number 12. All right, Stephen, really exciting couple of weeks here. I mean, the little season that could just keeps chugging along.
Yeah, really, we came in with no expectations, and every single week, it's got to have a terrible ending, right? It just must get awful from here on in, because every week it's been so fun. One of the best pre-merges ever, and it's continued through the swap into the merge. It's just week to week, a surprising, satisfying, really character-rich show.
All right, Stephen, who got the fishy tonight?
Have to check it out. Have to read the blog.
Oh, come on. We're going to read it anyway.
People don't. People just want to know who gets.
They just want to know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Okay. All right, so follow Stephen on Twitter at Stephen Fishbach to get a hold of that People blog and find out the answer of Who got the fishy tonight? So we will be with bated breath, and check that out. Also, don't forget Scott Pollard exit interview tomorrow. Looking forward to hearing what he has to say about all of this and what his spin is on all this. If he has any choice words for Ty following this, very, very fun to hear what he's going to say. Then fun podcast coming up with Shireen coming up on Thursday, and then voicemails with Scott Green. Get your voicemails in. Go to robhasawebsite.com/voicemail or 323-282-RHAP. And Stephen, that's going to do it for us here tonight.
This was good.
Good stuff. Great episode. So fun to do it. Not as fun as in person.
Yeah, no, last week was so great, but this week is good. This is fine.
Yeah. No, this was very good stuff. All right, so that's going to do it for us. Looking forward to reading your comments on robhasawebsite.com. Of course, please try to keep it civil. We do appreciate that, right, Stephen?
Yeah. Yes, we do.
Yeah. Look, we all love the same show. We can all get along. All right, robhasawebsite.com, and subscribe to the podcast. Go to robhasawebsite.com/iTunes or search for RHAP in your favorite podcatcher. Have a great one, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Bye.